Chapter 6 is called Sin, Anthropology and Asymmetry. And it sounds really dry, doesn't it? It sounds like some sort of sociology textbook. But it was actually one of the funnest and most illuminating chapters to write. I think I learnt more than from this chapter than from almost any other in the book. And I think it's one of the most penetrating for cultural critique, because the stuff that I found out and put in this chapter I've just found really, really helpful for understanding and engaging with various different manifestations of culture. So what is this thing called asymmetry? I think I get the term from Paul Ricoeur. I think he uses it. And all that he's saying is that good and evil in the Bible are not equal and opposite. We don't live in a dualistic universe where there's a good God over here and a bad God over there, and they're pretty much evenly matched, and they're just slugging it out for all eternity. In fact, you can go further than that for Ricoeur, and he says that the way in which Genesis 1-3 splits the origin of good in Genesis 1, it was very good, from the origin of evil in Genesis 3, is the most radical, I think he says something like the most radical limiting and containment of evil in all, I don't know, the world's great ideologies or something like that, he says. And the more I've thought about that, the more I've been struck by the insight of that comment. Evil is part of creation. It's not part of God. It's not some sort of hidden aspect of God's character. The serpent in Genesis 3 is a creature. It has been created by God. And there's a whole 2 chapters before evil sort of pokes its nasty head on the scene. And this means that throughout the whole history of the Bible, throughout the whole Bible story, good and evil are not equal. There's never really any sense that evil's going to overpower good. You know, the devil, think about the prologue to the book of Job. The relationship between them is so unequal. And this, I think, gives Christians a very particular take on culture in a number of different ways, and I try and tease these out in the chapter. So what have we got here? We've got the asymmetry and cultural critique. So one of the ways that I think this shapes the way that a Christian opens him or herself to culture and engages with it is that reality is rhythmed for the Christian, not with good and evil being equal, but with good ultimately triumphing over evil and good preceding evil and exceeding evil. God is bigger and better and stronger than Satan. And therefore, a faithful production of culture from a Christian point of view is going to want to reflect that at some level. So, and this is Francis Schaeffer's idea in, I think it's Art and the Bible is his book, where he says there's a major theme and a minor theme in culture, and the major theme is goodness. Creation was created good, and it has not lost that goodness through the introduction of sin. But it's been palimpsestually marked and scarred by sin in a way that will ultimately be cleaned up, but hasn't been yet. And so there's this minor theme of sin, and I'm sure he's riffing slightly on the idea of major key and minor key as well. And he says we're going to want to reflect both of those in our art. We're not going to just want to paint completely in the major key, to have some sort of sickly, everything's well with the world, I'm okay, you're okay, we're all okay type art. But neither are we going to want to simply keep hitting away at the minor key as if that was all that there was to reality. Now, of course, different artists have different callings and engage with different parts of the world. And so you're not going to have some sort of cookie cutter idea of what Christian art should be like. But I think this Schaefferian idea of the major key and the minor key is really helpful for giving Christians a sense of what culture can and globally, what it can be, and the way it can authentically reflect reality as the Bible understands reality. And then I think this asymmetry has implications for politics as well, in the sense that for the Christian view of reality, the way things are now, after the fall, before the consummation of all things at the end of the Bible, the way things are now is not how they've always been and not how they will be. So the Christian has a norm against which to measure current reality. the creation norm and the norm of redemption. And that gives you a position from which to do cultural critique that lifts you out of the status quo. It gives you a critique of the status quo in a way that it's really, really hard to get if you don't, if your sense of reality is that, well, things have pretty much always been as they are and they always will be as they are, and that there's nowhere outside reality from which to get a view of it, from which to critique it. And cultural critics have wrestled with this over the years. Theodor Adorno has a passage towards the end of Minima Moralia, I think, where he talks about the standpoint of redemption, the necessity of the standpoint of redemption for cultural critique. And what he means is this sense of a norm or a baseline reality outside the status quo from which we can look at how things are now and critique it meaningfully, and for that critique to have weight and not just be a sort of chimerical, I wish things were different. And the Asymmetry of Good and Evil essentially gives us that take on reality that allows us a firm footing for cultural critique as such.